Right. Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in again for the Cybersecurity Magazine Podcast. My name is Christian Rudolph and joining me today is Adam Shostack, a renowned expert on threat modeling, secure design, has written a very popular book on the topic. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So keeping in mind that a lot of our readers and listeners might not be threat modeling experts yet, why don't we start out with the basics? So can you tell us a little bit about what threat modeling is and the purpose that it serves?
Sure. So threat modeling is all about how we approach thinking about a new system or a system we're improving in some way and help make it secure in a structured, systematic, and comprehensive way. And the simple way that we do that, threat modeling, it can seem a little scary, it can seem a little intense, it can seem a little big, but it's actually really simple. There are 4 questions that we're always answering, and those questions are, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? And all of the complexity that comes into threat modeling is, how do I answer that for my medical device? How do I answer that for my mobile app? How do I do this in an agile way? And anything we do in technology can get complicated, it can get intricate, it can get nuanced. But what we're doing is actually pretty simple. We're measuring twice, cutting once. We're thinking about where we're going with the technology so that we can plan for the right level of security for the thing that we're doing. The next version of Angry Birds needs less security than a defibrillator that's going to send shocks to someone's heart. And we can think about that in what can go wrong. You lose your Angry Bird, or you lose your friend. So for one, and we're already threat modeling, by the way, for one, we want to go into a lot more depth about how that can happen. We want to go into a lot more depth about what are we going to do about
it. That already tells us a little bit that it probably depends a bit on the system that you're modeling, to what extent you're going, and the risk that's associated with it. Maybe before we get to that point, you mentioned planning and planning for what can go wrong. That seems to suggest threat modeling is done at the very beginning of the system lifecycle, solution lifecycle. Is it only helpful at that point, or when would threat modeling usually occur?
Tomorrow. Look, when we are lucky enough to work on something that is greenfield, we have the opportunity to make choices that are very impactful. And most of what we do in our jobs is not greenfield. It's evolving, it's refactoring, it's rebuilding, it's enhancing. And so as we do that work, we can think about, how do I make sure that whatever it is I'm working on right now gets the benefit of security in a way that's appropriate, right? Look, I've been working in security for a long time. I like to secure things. I enjoy that part of the engineering discipline, but I only get a chance to do it when I'm engaged with the engineers building something. And so if I'm like, hey, we've got to burn this thing down and rebuild it because it's so insecure, your listeners are going to be like, thanks, Adam. That was really informative. We'll give you a call soon. And so we've got to think about the work that we're doing as part of a bigger project. Yeah, and if that bigger project is really big, fine. And if it's really small, again, I go back to those 4 questions. What are we working on right now? What can go wrong with the things that we're adding? What are we going to do about it for the things that we're adding? And if we think about it like that, and if we think about it in terms of the real constraints that we all work in, then maybe, I'm going to look over there. There's painful, but we can say, okay, let's take that on. Or, I was talking to someone a couple days ago, 6,000 applications in use. There is approximately a 1 in 6 chance that the one I'm looking at is the most risky thing for their organization. And so if I'm like, ooh, look, this is the thing in front of me, let's threat model it, let's improve it, odds are really good I'm not putting my energy to the highest return.
Yeah, that makes sense. When we look at who performs threat modeling, of course, you need a good understanding of the system that you're building. At times, that might not be always the team that has all the security expertise. So who is it that is in charge, so to say, of performing threat modeling? Is it the engineering team? Is it the security folks? Is it both of them working together?
Even back in the day when I was at Microsoft, and Microsoft was investing a lot in security. We had an amazing talent pool across the company. We did not have enough people for a security expert to be in every design discussion. And so my answer is it's got to be the engineers. And if that's the case, then we've got to go to the question of what can go wrong and say, answer that to the best of your ability. We can think about how do we help them, ranging from just encouraging them to ask that question. And I really want to start there and sit there for a second, because in 2022, we all are reading security stories in the news. We're all listening to security stories happen. Bringing that to bear is powerful. And from there, we can go, we can card games. I'm working on a new book that's literally what every engineer should learn from Star Wars about threats. We can teach engineers these things. And I think, again, in 2022, it's part of good engineering, in the same way that quality has moved from, we used to have QA engineers and now we expect developers to write unit tests. We're moving to a place where we expect developers and operations and SRE to be thinking about security.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah, definitely. Everyone should at least have some knowledge, some basic knowledge, and should kind of feel accountable for the security of the systems they're building. Yeah, and in that sense, maybe threat modeling is also tightly coupled with this concept of shift left security, making sure that security is embedded into every phase of the system development lifecycle in that sense.
Absolutely. The old way, I got my start in application security doing code reviews at a bank. And what would happen is they'd write the code and then they'd bring it to us. And we'd sort of sigh and go, oh. If if we don't help engineers think the way we as security people have learned to think just a little bit, that pattern repeats. And I want to go back to a word you used, if I may, which was accountability. If we're gonna ask developers to be accountable for the security quality of their code, we first need to give them the training, the support, the assessment criteria. We can't just say, hey, Tuesday, you're now accountable for this. That's 25% out of your bonus, right? That's just not a fair thing to do. But I think we are moving towards a place where that request is more and more reasonable.
Definitely, yeah. I see. Now, going into some more detail about, so we've established that threat modeling is essential, and everybody should do at least some level of threat modeling. You've helped numerous people threat model all kinds of systems. What are some of the most common pitfalls, the biggest challenges that you see, especially as people begin to apply these practices?
So the first is a phrase, think like an attacker. I don't know how an attacker thinks. I like to say, think like a professional chef, right? Tonight, you need to prep 3 dinner services for customers who'll be coming to your restaurant at random times. Go. I start doing that work. But restaurants do. And if we just tell people you need to think like an attacker, it's a trap, because in security, we learn about adversarial thinking, we learn about nonlinear thinking, but a developer often doesn't. The other trap that I think is really pernicious is threat modeling has to be big and heavyweight. There's a perception out there, and look, I contributed to it. I wrote a 600-page book. I'm sorry. And the reason it's so long is because I wanted to put a lot of different details in. And that obscures the fact that we've got 4 simple questions that are the heart of threat modeling. So the second big trap is thinking it's got to be big, instead of I just need to answer 4 simple questions.
Got it. And with that, you're already leading to my next question here, which is this only something for big companies, or should every startup building a little software application with five people, should they also be concerned? And I'm thinking that's the case, right?
So my last startup, there was me and one other guy as we got started, and we spent an hour sketching, this is what we're going to do. And in the course of that hour, we found 2 or 3 big flaws in our initial thinking. And we shifted our initial thinking, right? And it was cheap because it was early. And it helped us get the product to MVP faster and with less churn because we spent an hour on it. And there's this myth, which is that people working at startups don't plan and they don't prototype, right? They want to fail fast. But the reality is, nobody sits down and starts writing code int 32i and then pauses to say, what should I do next? Right? They've thought about what it is they're going to do. They've constructed at least a mental model. They know where they're going. And that level of detail is enough. You know, put a couple of lines on a piece of paper, put your user, draw a line to the first process that they connect to. What does that process connect to? What data are you storing? You know, that level of sketching is enough to start saying, what can go wrong with this? We might have the wrong user show up. We might be storing data in an open S3 bucket. We might be mixing test and prod in a single environment. And once you have that conversation, you don't need this to be a big company thing with fancy packages of Visio diagrams with like a 3-page key explaining how it all works. This can be really lightweight.
I see. Yeah, and I think helping with that, there are established best practices out there. So it's nothing where you have to come up from scratch with a methodology to do this. So with that said, what are some of these established best practices? What are some of the frameworks that one can look for to get started with threat modeling?
So my favorite frameworks to start with are data flow diagrams. And a data flow diagram is a really simple type of diagram. It has like 5 or 6 elements of running code, data stores, data flows, and external entities. And we add in trust boundaries. Where do things get broken up? And I'm fond of 2 different ways of answering the question, what can go? And data flow diagrams, by the way, help us create models, diagrams of what we're working on. They look a lot like whiteboard diagrams. To get to what can go wrong, I like STRIDE. STRIDE is a mnemonic. It stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, info disclosure, denial of service, and expansion of authority. And you can find information about STRIDE. The trick to using it is to ask, how could someone achieve this threat in our system? The second way that I really like for helping people think about this is kill chains. Thinking about, and kill chains can be a little bit more tricky to use, but if you think about how would an attacker deliver their attack, what would it exploit or take advantage of? How would it persist or install something? How does it get its orders? And then what does it do? And you follow that story, you can see, oh, we could put a firewall here, or we could use an immutable build so it can't install software. We could configure that firewall to prevent outgoing calls. And if it can't make outgoing calls, it can't get command and control nearly so easily. And so it starts to lead towards answers on what are we going to do about this, right? And you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Most security systems seem to fail for reasons that, with the benefit of hindsight, and that's a really important phrase, with the benefit of hindsight, turn out to be a little obvious. Or, with the benefit of a little bit of threat modeling, we can anticipate them. And here's a third trap that people fall into, which is the belief that they've got to be perfect or it's not worth the effort. A little bit of threat modeling is highly likely to reduce the number of crises that your software goes through over time. We can make things better. And yeah, attackers can be clever. They can be dedicated, persistent, whatever term you want to use. But like everything else that we're building, we build something, we assess it, we say, is this good enough? Good enough varies, we've talked about that. But if we never start on security because we're afraid that we'll never finish, then whatever we're working on is going to have a lot of problems versus whatever we're working on might have a smaller number. And I think it's worth driving towards that smaller number.
That makes sense. And I think if I can pick up on one aspect that you just mentioned, it doesn't have to be perfect, and it certainly won't be perfect. in the first iteration. And now we mentioned earlier that, of course, you want to start early. You want to do that in the initial phases of your project or of your solution development. But it doesn't mean you just do it at that point in time, right? I would assume a threat model can also evolve, should evolve as your solution evolves over time, right?
That's why I said you should do it tomorrow. A little bit of, I'm adding this feature, or I'm refactoring my code. Ask what can go wrong with the new design for your code. Spending 30 seconds saying, spoofing, do I have any authentication here? Do I need some tampering? Do I need some integrity here? Repudiation, is it engaged with a customer in some way, that, or a partner or a supplier, in a way that they could say, that didn't happen, I didn't get that, I'm still waiting on this? Again, the question, what are we working on, can and should be, what are we working on right now? And so this becomes an iterative part of things. And people often ask me, does it fit with Agile? Yeah, it totally fits with Agile. You can threat model the sprint, the improvement, and doing the threat modeling in a lightweight way, so that it becomes part of your practice, part of your definition of done. Eventually, small changes accumulate, small improvements accumulate in really valuable ways. And sometimes when we're talking about security, we get very binary, right? We say things like, the attacker only needs to win once, the defender needs to win every time. But that ain't so. The reality is the attacker needs to evade every defense constantly, or they get caught, they get kicked out. And so some of the things that we tell ourselves discourage ourselves from doing the work that we can do and should do.
That's, I think, a really important message. Okay. Now, looking at threat modeling in general, and in this context of the software development industry waking up to the fact that this should actually be done, and everybody has kind of accountability for security, is threat modeling as a practice developing further? Are there new frameworks being developed? Is there any new way of thinking about this problem?
Oh, yeah. First, the 4-question framework really freed us up a lot, because I don't have to design a whole new way of threat modeling. And there were 15, 16 of us who came together. We released a threat modeling manifesto that coalesced around the 4-question framework. And because it enables you to just switch up the way you answer one question at a time, it moved us a little bit from monolithic threat modeling to microservices. I have a microservice that's going to help me answer this question, and we get all the agility of that. Kill chains are really being developed and understood now as a way to proactively understand what can go wrong, instead of just as a reactive tool for incident responders. There's a lot of innovation in tooling, different ways of representing threat models as code, different ways of automating threat modeling to help us analyze and scale it. It's all sorts of things that are making the practice better. And the other driver for innovation, frankly, is regulation. The Food and Drug Administration here in the United States has released a new draft pre-market cybersecurity guidance document. It's a lot of words. It's the things you need to do to ship a medical device. and it's 50 or 60 pages. A good third of it is about threat modeling. The new OMB, Office of Management and Budget Circular, talks about software companies needing to attest to the security of their software. It calls on NIST guidance around secure development. If you want to sell software to the US government or sell software to someone who's selling it to the US government, you need to start engaging now. It's really actually quite important that you engage now with these new things. And what's changing is that we're getting more and more experience. More and more people are picking up the threat modeling manifesto. They're going and doing a little bit of threat modeling, and they're saying, yeah, this helps me. And that creates a virtuous circle where if you haven't tried it, regulators are saying, well, why haven't you done this quite yet? And I think of the regulation as backstopping, right? I hate security as compliance because it gets us in this mindset of, I do the minimum thing I can do to get done. The real reason that developers are picking up threat modeling, that ops people are picking up threat modeling in more structured ways, is pride of delivery. I am pleased with what I shipped because I threat modeled it. And that's changing because we see more and more people who can make that statement. Banks, medical device companies, autonomous vehicle companies. I'm honored to be able to work with people who are building literal spacecraft. More and more success stories are shifting the balance. And so I really want to encourage your listeners to go ask those 4 questions. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? Did we do a good job? And to give it a shot, to make a commitment. You know, the first time, and I'm not a gym person, by the way, but the first time I go to the gym, my muscles are sore, I'm unhappy. Anything you're doing for the first time has a little bit of that. You're going to be like, what am I doing? Is it good enough? Give it a fair shot. Invest in it. Assess your own work. Practice makes perfect. Or practice makes good enough. I was just talking about how we don't need to be perfect.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, Adam, thank you so much. This has been extremely insightful, and I'm sure our listeners feel encouraged to give threat modeling a shot now. Before we close this out, if people want to dive deeper into this topic, where should they go to learn more? So
I've got a website which is primarily dedicated to threat modeling at shostack.org, shostack.org. I'm sure we'll get it into the show notes and whatnot. And there's a whole resource section that's there. It's got getting started guides. It's got all sorts of information. Your local OWASP meetup is a place to go. And so, but really, just give it a shot. Ask those questions. You know, there's a lot of words about this, and I like writing, I like talking about it. But as Yoda likes to say, there is no try. There is do and do not. So I hope you all do.
Fantastic. We'll leave it with that. Adam, thank you so much for your time
You're
today.
welcome. This was a real pleasure.